What up? Welcome into the MLB Swing for the Fences show here on the Run Pier Sports YouTube channel. Bright and early here in Denver, talking a couple of slates. We've got a early 6-game slate, at least on DraftKings. Looks like it's 5 games on FanDuel, and then we do have pretty much baseball all day, man. Going if you want to be, if you're a baseball fan watching ball, you can play the afternoon slate. We've got a pretty decent night slate as well, which I think we'll have time to touch on at the end of this show. But we do have 6 early games to talk about that will be the primary focus of this MLB show. How you doing here on this Wednesday morning, Mango?
Yeah, we just got breaking NFL news, DC. I don't know if you caught this one. It just when we went live, big time wide receiver was traded. Can you guess? Like a big named receiver in the league just got done.
I would guess Justin Jefferson, but no, I didn't see it.
It's not Justin Jefferson. It's Stephon Diggs. Stephon Diggs no longer on the Bills, and I think everyone thought that there was like a little trouble in paradise between Allen and Diggs over the past year or so, and he got traded to the Texans. So CJ Stroud's problem now is Stephon Diggs, and hey, that's a nice addition. They gave up the Texans get a 5th and 6th round pick and Diggs, and the Bills all they get is a 2nd round pick. They didn't get much for it. So I don't know. It's interesting trade that just went down. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think he's got a pretty big contract, so I assume that had something to do with the lack of compensation. Also, he's like fallen off a cliff, I think, at the end of the last couple of seasons, if my memory serves me right on that. So yeah, it did seem like he was kind of, him and Josh Allen seemed like they were kind of souring on each other a little bit. So it did seem like it was time to move on from that. But interesting trade for the Texans. I mean, they already got Tank Dell, Nico Collins. They add Diggs to the mix. I think they had maybe even one more guy than that. I haven't even thought about football for a while, to be honest. But yeah, love CJ Stroud, and yeah, you would certainly think that would aid him going forward, no question about it. So yeah, I like that trade. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was time for Buffalo to move on from that situation. You could just tell it was like causing some kind of issues at least there, and I don't know, it just seemed like things were bad there. So I'm happy with it. I think it makes sense. Did CJ Stroud and the Texans? No one saw this coming, right? If I told you this a year ago, you would say it's absolutely crazy. And it's been a good year for the Texans.
I was in on CJ Stroud, so I won't go completely crazy, but I do hear what you're saying, and that's going to be a dynamic passing offense, no question about it.
Oh yeah, they added who else they added? They added Joe Mixon, so we get Joe Mixon to ruin our lives for he gets to ruin it in the playoffs. I'm sure he'll be in the playoffs. We'll see a lot of Joe Mixon in our lives, sadly. So
yeah, that part I'm less excited about, Mr. Joe Mixon, but he won't go away. He's got to haunt our dreams a little bit longer. Yeah, let's get into this baseball show as people kind of trickle in here on obviously a work morning. Like I said, a 6-game slate. We do have pretty worrisome, in my opinion, weather issues in 3 of the 6 games, which is going to make for obviously an interesting slate. So one of the bigger weather issues is KC and Baltimore, which is the first game that we will talk about. Certainly, Mr. Corbin Burns starting for the Orioles is an interesting play. Was fantastic. His first start against the LA Angels, I mean, who have been just a pretty abysmal offense so far, so maybe no surprise there. But Burns looked awesome in his Orioles debut. He'll go up against Cole Ragans, who was not as dominant as Burns was, but did look very strong in his debut against the Twins. 9 strikeouts over 6 innings, got up to 97 pitches in that one. And if this game does play, Mangone, it's going to be a very pitcher-friendly environment. It's going to be, 45, 50 degrees, already a good park to pitch in Baltimore, and probably 15 to 20 mile per hour winds blowing in from right field, which is kind of the one place that you can hit for power in Baltimore. We see a total at 7.5. Honestly, if the game does play, I like the under on that number. I really like both these pitchers. 2 very, very good arms, 2 strikeout arms, and obviously not as good a matchup for Ragans as it is for Corbin Burns. But we do kick this game off kick the slate off rather with a good pitching matchup. And it's just a matter of the weather. So right now it did look like the rain has kind of cleared for now, at least in Baltimore. Obviously this game doesn't start for another 2 hours. Looking at like the forecast and the radar though, I do think it's kind of projected to be raining all day. It's been raining all night there. So, we're going to talk about all these games as if they're going to play because none have been postponed or delayed yet or anything like that. And, we just don't know this far prior to lock. So we'll break all these games down as if they're going to go. And then obviously we'll just have to adjust as this play progresses as we get closer to lock. I'll throw it over to you, man, going for Baltimore and Kansas City. What do you see here?
Yeah, it's worth mentioning. This is like a really good pitcher slate, especially for only being 6 games. So like it's going to be hard to just say, oh, you can't play this offense because they're going against good pitchers. To be honest, a lot of guys are going against good pitchers. So I think this is a game that overall I'm gonna have some interest in Baltimore's offense. Now, I agree. DC Reagan's was great the other day, but we are gonna have to play some offenses, and sometimes you just buy into an elite offense. Now, if the weather's okay, I'm okay with playing a very low-owned Baltimore offense. We know what this team can do. If they get a hold of Reagan's too, you'll get into that Kansas City bullpen, which I'm sure still isn't great. Especially the back half of guys when they're down. It just seems like an offense worth buying it on a slate where, like I said, the pitching, there's good pitching all around. I'll just go through it real quick. Strider, Corbin Burns, Nathan Eovaldi, Zach Wheeler, Cole Reagans, even Aaron Savale. I mean, yeah, he was pretty good the other day. They're going up against Texas, though, but you got Savale. Then it starts to kind of start dropping off, right? You got Paddock. Montes is showing some good stuff. We got AJ Puck, who we'll talk about. I'm sure you'll still like. Patrick Sandoval, who's a boom bust guy, and Joe Ross. I mean, it's just there are a lot of good pitching options where I think you can make an argument for the Orioles offense for that alone. It's just an elite offense on a really tough pitching slate. Now, weather is going to be an issue. If the weather is going to be in the way, then of course I won't want to, take my chance there. So that's the big thing that we have to watch for. And of course, I know you mentioned weather is going to be big. Did you say wind was blowing in? I guess that's one thing I may have missed. Is that correct, DC?
I mean, from what I'm seeing, it's projected to be a really, really tough hitting environment here to the point where, I really wouldn't want to invest in these offenses too much myself.
So I'll admit that's the one thing I didn't even look at this morning because again, early morning here on the Mountain Time, I didn't look at weather that deep. So yeah, if wind's blowing in, probably not. That's the one thing so we'll take shots in other spots. Let's just say no on this game. That's tough. And I mean, if the pitchers are going to go, this is going to be a great spot to take like Corbin Burns. You could take chances on Cole Reagans, but we need to that's kind of something you'll decide when you're literally 15 minutes before lock, where we've gotten more information on the actual weather.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's just a situation that often comes up in these early season baseball games where it's cold and rainy, especially over on the East Coast, where we're just not going to be able to make this call weather-wise until it's closer to game time. There is rain coming. Baltimore is going to get more rain today. It's just a matter of how much of it is going to hit the stadium, right? And you can look at the radar now. You can look at the forecast hour by hour. But it's unclear, and it'll change depending on where you look. So, listen, I'm in on Burns, especially if the weather looks clear enough, or even if he can get through 5 or 6 innings. I think at that $9,400 price point on DraftKings, he's a pretty strong play. But again, it's a call that we're going to have to make closer to lock time, closer to first pitch. And of course, we'll be in the Discord and discussing all that and making our final calls there. For now, I'll just say I'm most likely going to be out on the offenses here. 2 pitchers I really believe in. Tough pitchers park, tough hitting environment, wind blowing in. I just don't see a big reason to go here. And then I do want to play Corbin Burns if the weather looks tolerable and looks like they'll be able to get in enough innings for him to matter. That's KC and Baltimore. Let's get to a game that I think is certainly much safer in terms of weather, but I also think much better in terms of offenses to target. We have Nathan Eovaldi pitching for the Texas Rangers. This one in Tampa. Aaron Savale on the hill for the Tampa Bay Rays, who looked pretty damn good against the Toronto Blue Jays in his first start, somewhat surprisingly, at least to me. Eovaldi coming in at 9K, Savali at 7,700, and 8 total in this game. Pretty closely lined. The Rays slight favorites sitting at -120 or so. Two decent pitchers, but also two pretty good offenses. I think you could kind of play both sides perhaps in this one, man, going kind of depending on how many games we think we have to choose from with the weather issues that we do have on this slate. I'll throw it over to you for Rangers and Rays.
Yeah, it definitely depends on how many games we have on the slate, right? Obviously, it's a 6-gamer, could become a 3-gamer, and that would put this game more in play. If I had to pick a side to take a chance on, it's probably the Rangers. You know, they're pricey, but they're going up against Aaron Savale, and they're just an elite offense, right? It's kind of similar to the Baltimore thing I was making the argument for. Sure, we're not saying we want to go out and pick on Aaron Savale, but it's definitely a spot where I just think you have to consider Texas. It's because it's going to be a shorter slate. And price tag wise, again, Semien and Corey Seager, they're expensive, but we can find some value throughout the lineup, right? Like Jared Walsh at 3.3K, Josh Smith at 2.3, Duran 2.8, Jonah Heim at catcher 3.6, and Tavares at 3.4. There's enough guys, and 1 through 9, this is a great lineup to get exposure to. I'm not going to ignore this Texas team. There's definitely one that's on my radar today. I like them a lot. I'm not dying to attack Nathan Eovaldi. I'm a little surprised that the Rays are favorites. I don't know about you. I guess maybe that's more respect to Savali than you would think. I think, listen, Eovaldi, I know he's been great in the postseason, and at times the regular season he hasn't looked the same, but I'd rather bet on Eovaldi against this Rays offense, and I'm not that scared of the Rays. The only guy in the offense that I'm really that worried about is that like 1-2 punch of Brandon Lau and Randy Arozarena. The rest of the guys, like, I mean, they're not that great, right? You could take chances on them, but I would rather go to this next game and take some chances on some other bats there than, I think take shots on the Rays against Nathan Eovaldi. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but I just think the Rangers are clearly a way better play than the Rays, and I don't really agree with like the spread on. I think the Rangers should be favorites.
Yeah, we actually agree on this game for sure. I like the Rangers' offense better. I think Eovaldi is the better pitcher between Savali and Eovaldi. I will say sometimes when a pitcher moves to the Rays, like they often they've got one of the reasons they're able to compete year in year out without a high payroll whatsoever is because they do have one of the better analytical teams in baseball. And so when they acquire a pitcher, it was Zach Eflin last year. He was kind of a big nothing burger for his whole career. The Rays get him. They give him like the biggest contract of any pitcher they've ever signed in their franchise history. Everyone's like, oh, what are they doing? And he becomes, borderline ace for the Rays. And so when they acquire a pitcher like Aaron Savali, you kind of wonder what are they going to uncover that other teams couldn't. I will say, though, Savali did come from the Cleveland Guardians, who also are very, very good at developing pitching. So we'll see. I mean, Savali's first start was great. Maybe the Rays have figured something out with him. Nevertheless, though, I'm on the same side as you. I really like the top half of that Texas lineup. Semien, Seager, the rookie Wyatt Langford. I really like him. And then Adolis Garcia and Jared Walsh. I think that top 5 could definitely do some damage against Savale. And, depending on, listen, I mean, 3 of the 3 best pitchers on the slate, Strider, Burns, Wheeler, are all in some jeopardy as of right now of having their games postponed or delayed to the point where you wouldn't want to play them. And we'll see what happens with the weather on those 3 guys, on those 3 games. If it's looking too risky to play, I do think Eovaldi does become in play against the Rays, who do have a pretty right-handed heavy and pretty strikeout-prone lineup as well. We know if Eovaldi can miss some bats if he's on his game. Was up to 88 pitches in that first outing. Only got the 3 strikeouts, but he should be a full go here. Should get close to 100 pitches if things are going well. And I do think Eovaldi at 9K would be a solid play. I certainly have him below Strider, Burns, and Wheeler if those guys look, okay, if they look safe to play. But if not, I do think Eovaldi becomes perhaps the top option for pitching on this slate overall. So, just wanted to put that out there. My preference would be to play those 3 guys, but if you can't, or if it looks too risky to me, Eovaldi would become a pretty good play. Anything else? Go ahead.
Yeah, DC, I was going to say, this is one of those good spots. If we get a shorter slate, right? Sometimes on short slates, I just like to load up on one game with the pitching and then maybe get the hitting in one other game. If you had to pick the one game of the dome games to load up on the pitching, this is the one. And because of the uncertainty in weather in these other games, I think a lot of people will still, if you're playing like the big GPP, people are still going to play Strider and have no clue with the weather, right? And not saying make mistakes because we don't know what the answer to the weather question is, but if you feel confident that those 3 games are going to be washed out, there will still be ownership on those other guys. Trust me, people will make that mistake. And if you just load up on this game, the combination of Eovaldi and Savale, it will be lower owned than you think. And I think I know for a fact that if I was only playing one team on this slate and I had to pick 2 pitchers, these would probably be the 2 pitchers I would take the chance on. To just play it in the same game and hope it's a game that just cruises and it's a low-scoring game and take shots on other bats. At least that's where I'm at. I'm curious what you think about the next coming up pitchers and bats, but that's kind of my thought on the dome games.
No, I agree with that. I do think it's a good time to bring up another general point on kind of game theory on these early weather baseball slates. If you're going to take a risk, I think the Braves and White Sox game, if they decide to play it, I think it'll be pretty much risk-free to play the entire 9 innings because it's cold and right now it's literally snowing in Chicago. But I don't think the weather is going to get worse as the day progresses. I think it's going to get better. So if they do decide just to start that game on time, I feel good that game will play. Whether or not they decide to play it, I think is up for debate. But Baltimore and Kansas City, and then I also think Philadelphia and Cincinnati are, even if they start them on time, they're going to be at risk of delay and not finishing the game, at all. And those games, if you're going to play it, I think you kind of want to load up on a Baltimore Royals game, right? Maybe you play both pitchers. Maybe you go to the bats in Philadelphia and Cincinnati. And if you on any one lineup, you can kind of pile in a lot of hitters because your lineup is pretty much dead if you get 2 scratches, right? Maybe you could scratch out a min cash. You're not going to win a tournament with 2 zeros. So you don't want to spread the risk among multiple games on any one lineup. You kind of want to load up and say, you know what, I'm going to take the risk on this game, stack all the offense, and then go to pitching in another game, something like that, right? I think is a good game theory approach to these weather slates. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, don't do like a Ronald Acuna one-off, right? Sure, Ronald Acuna is great at baseball, but if the weather looks dicey, then don't do that. Load up on the game if you really want to, and then have teams that don't have that game, right? I think that's a really good approach to kind of go about it.
It sounds obvious to me, but a lot of people won't do that. They'll just treat the slate as normal, right?
It's definitely not that easy. One thing to do too, if you're using an optimizer, which I am, it's when I do it, what I'm going to do is I might build 5 teams. Because I'm doing 10 on DK, I think I'm doing 20 on FanDuel. I might do 5 that have 0 weather and just X out those games and run 5 and then run 5 without, right? And then those are just ways that you can do it. You can X off the games, then add teams to your script. There's ways that you could be hey, only do certain stacks. There's different rules that you can set. So look into that as you get closer. And then, of course, let's say the weather comes up and it's not going to be a bad game, then you could X that rule out. So these are things to think about, though. I agree 1,000% with what you're saying, DC. And I think one reason why people don't is a lot of people just run the optimizer and hope for the best. I know yesterday when I ran stuff, I X'd off the Mets and Tigers game. It worked out well. I normally try to err on the side of caution. I don't think it's worth taking a shot on. I'd rather play these dome games than mess around with the weather.
Yeah, David says it's not snowing. I assume he's referring to Chicago. I'm not in Chicago. All I can do is look at the radar and read the report. And here's what I see. Snow this morning will mix with rain at times this afternoon. Temp steady in the mid to upper 30s. Chance of precipitation 100%. Snowfall around 1 inch. Winds could gust to over 40 miles per hour. That sounds about as brutal as a baseball weather slate as you can get. So maybe it's not snowing right now. I'm looking at the radar, if it's not snowing, it's on the verge of snowing at this moment. I mean,
where's our very own Steve Boyton with the
needs some boots on the ground in Chicago. But regardless, it's dicey weather conditions in Chicago. That much I think is very much clear. That's Texas and Tampa Bay. I think we are done with that game. Let's move to another game that is safe from the weather in Miami. We have Mr. AJ Puck back into our lives 5 days later after, not stealing, not just my money, not just RPS subs money. He ended up being kind of an industry darling, industry chalk on that day. I think he was 37% owned in the flagship DraftKings GPP. He'll go up against Patrick Sandoval, who had a terrible opening day himself in Baltimore, made it just 1.2 innings, gave up 5 runs, 3 were earned, a couple walks, only 60 pitches. He wasn't great. That was, of course, in Baltimore. And then AJ Puck, who I was very high on coming into the season, took about 2 batters, about 5-10 pitches into that game, even though the first inning was fine, where I'm like, this is not going to go well. His velocity was way down. He had really no control problems last year throughout spring and ended up walking 6 hitters. Now, no excuses to play like a champion, right? But the Marlins didn't do that. They had excuses for AJ Puck. Puck did himself. The roof was open. Apparently, it was super humid. I think he had trouble gripping the ball, which kind of contributed to him not throwing as hard. And it kind of makes sense. Like the velocity was down, the control wasn't there with the 6 walks, something that he normally doesn't have trouble with. And the spring results still what they were. They were fantastic. So it's hard for me to know what to expect from AJ Puck here. I kind of wasn't hoping to go back to him, but reading that stuff, listening to the interviews, I do think there's a chance Puck bounces back here and kind of shows more of what I expected to see from him in that first start. I think Miami will have the roof closed today. I'm not 100% sure on that, but that is something to monitor to make sure. Like if you watched him too, he was just like sweating profusely out there on the mound. So I do think there could be potentially something to that. But anyway, he does get a really good matchup here against a bad Angels team that is strikeout prone as well. Mike Trout off to a hot start, but they're not doing a ton else otherwise. So yeah, Puck at 7K back in their lives. I do think he is interesting today, especially if the weather proves kind of intolerable in those other 3 games. And then Sandoval, no interest really there for me. I will say this Miami team, I believe they're 0-5 now, really hasn't been hitting whatsoever. So not a bad matchup for Sandoval. Nice park to pitch in Miami, assuming the roof is closed at least. So the 2 lefties here, Puck, Sandoval, Angels, and Marlins. We'll go back to you, Mangone. What do you got for us?
Yeah, I will say I have a soft spot for Patrick Sandoval. When I won that final seat, Patrick Sandoval was the guy throwing BP to the Orioles. So, of course, I want to go back.
I thought you were going to say that you won it with him, which would have been even more impressive. But no. You got the Orioles.
No, it was with Glass now for I actually didn't have one of the amazing performances. It was just he just churned in a decent game, and then Dave Roberts pulled him a little early. But it was nice to play Baltimore there. Honestly, this Marlins roster, it's definitely not bad for DFS, right? You have Lisa Rise, who always turns the lineup around. You have the combo of Josh Bell, Jake Berger, Brian De La Cruz, and Jazz Chisholm. That, I think that 4-man right there, it's really good, especially where you get De La Cruz for a pretty cheap price tag. And then the bottom of the order, it's got guys like Avisail Garcia, who people won't play, who's got some pop in him. Tim Anderson, who I know, us RPS guys like a little bit. You got the Nick Fortes punt option at catcher if you want. I think against a guy like Patrick Sandoval, it's a really good spot to take a chance on it. So I'm going to take a chance on these Marlins today. I think they're really good options, especially with all the weather situations that we're dealing with. Patrick Sandoval is a very up and down guy. He's someone that whenever you typically see him, his strikeout prop is never going to be super low because they're guessing for the median outcome where it's he's got high ceiling, but he's got a very low floor. And if you get that low floor game, listen, the ball is going to be flying. It's going to be like BP. That's why I want to take a chance on it. And that's why I took a chance on it the other day. I remember I increased the projection on the Orioles because I looked around at the pitchers on the slate, and I said, it's opening day, right? At least I think that Thursday was opening day. And I was like, this is the SP1. Like, Sandoval's a guy that you definitely take advantage of. This is another tough pitching slate. I want to load up on these Marlins. I think they're one of the better offenses on this slate. So I'm definitely going to be in on them. I will say if it becomes like a shorter slate where it's only 3 games, like you could play AJ Puck and then play a Mike Trout on the opposite side. It's definitely a very it seems like something that sounds like a terrible idea to suggest, but on these shorter slates, you can definitely do that if it becomes a short slate, right? If it becomes a 3-gamer and we lose all the weather, I don't hate that idea for sure. I also don't hate this Angels offense. I think they're better than the games we've talked about so far, but I think this next one we're going to talk about is like the best dome game for offenses. So I don't mind taking chances on some of these Angels. This lineup, it's not incredible. They do have Logan O'Hoppe, who I think is a pretty solid catcher. He's pricey, but he's there. You got Mike Trout, who's obviously a great hitter. Taylor Ward, I never mind taking chances on. He's got a lot of power and pop. I see Miguel Sano is back in our lives. I haven't seen that much of him. I don't know if he's better or if you have any takes on that.
He's still striking out like every other at bat. So.
Okay, yeah, he's still gotcha. I was curious. I didn't know if there was a resurgence coming through. But overall, you could take chances on these Angels. I think the Marlins are the best offense, though, we have talked about so far.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the Marlins make a lot of sense. Kind of mostly a bet against Sandoval, but I do think this Marlins offense will turn it around at some point. Seems like a pretty good spot to do it against Sandoval and the Angels bullpen. So that makes sense. And then, yeah, but I think you can play both sides. I think you can play Puck, but I don't hate this Angels offense either. Kind of like that 2-3-4, Hicks, Trout, Taylor Ward makes some sense against AJ Puck because we just don't know which AJ Puck is going to show up. Matt asked Floplex. Puck spot is pretty interesting. I assume not super high owned. Yeah, I don't think he'll be high owned. Obviously, ownership. I mean, it's really hard to predict right now, right? Because we don't even know which of these games are going to play. I will say, obviously, following the radar and the weather, it is looking better to me in Baltimore and Philadelphia as this morning progresses than it did early on. I do think at this point, Baltimore is probably going to start that game. If you asked me an hour, 90 minutes ago, I was pretty down on these games getting in. I hope they do. And I'm getting a little bit more optimistic. So I guess somewhat good news there. But again, not out of the woods yet on any of these weather games, at least in my opinion.
Yeah, and DC, if the Baltimore game plays, if people filed in late, we talked about how there's 20-mile-per-hour winds blowing in and everything like that. Like, it clearly be a better pitching spot than a bat spot, obviously. So figured I'd
100%. Actually, I know people are scared of that Orioles offense, rightfully so, but I think Cole Reagans would be in play as well. I think the only thing that's going to hurt Cole Reagans, for the most part, is the long ball, and it's going to be really, really hard to go yard in Baltimore today for both lefties and righties. So, yeah, good point there on the Baltimore and Royals game. One more game here in the 1:10 Eastern time window. It is Minnesota and Milwaukee, another game that will presumably be played indoors in that dome in Milwaukee. We have Joe Ross, who has not thrown a major league pitch in 2 years. I don't think he threw a single one in 2022 or 2023. He'll go up against Chris Paddock, who is a similar story. I think he threw like 4 or 5 innings last year for the Twins, coming back from Tommy John, I believe. 5 innings in 2023 for Paddock, 22 innings in 2022. So both these pitchers have been on the shelf. I'm a Twins fan, and I do think Chris Paddock has a decent shot at a kind of a bounce back solid year for the Twins. Not that I think he's going to be great by any means, but I do have some faith in him to prevent huge damage against him. Joe Ross, not really sure what to expect. He was pretty mediocre in spring training. He did get 17 strikeouts in 12 innings, but also allowed quite a bit of damage against him. Historically, Ross has really, really struggled against left-handed bats. I have no reason to assume that anything has changed there. But again, haven't seen him pitch in 2 years. So, data is certainly limited. We are kind of guessing a little bit on both of these guys on, where their skill set, where their skill level is at the moment. And we talked about, maybe Miami being the best offense on the slate that we've talked about so far. I think the Twins and the Brewers both come firmly into play in that discussion. This game, essentially a dead heat pick 'em. Both teams sitting around -110, 8.5 total. So a fairly decent total. I think a pretty interesting game overall here, man, going one that certainly like the offenses more than the pitching overall. What are your thoughts here on Twins and Brewers?
Yeah, we definitely agree liking the offense a little bit more. Another thing I'll mention I just think this is like a DFS-centric thing. When we talk early in the season, Joe Ross is cheap, but so are a lot of these other starting pitchers. I think Joe Ross, you could make a case that he could be in play if you needed to play a Spencer Strider, because you need salary relief to fit in some bats. But I just don't think Joe Ross is going to be a necessity on this slate. It is going to depend on that weather for the Spencer Strider game, which who knows, and that's an hour after, so that's going to be a big debate. I don't mind betting against this Twins offense without Royce O'Neal. My thought process is I'm just going to be more under on them. I'm not going to bet on Joe Ross. I'm more so just going to bet on not playing this offense I shouldn't say not, but being more under on the Twins offense and over on some other offenses, just because I know this Twins team, man, I don't know, without Royce Lewis, I just don't want to be super high on them. I think maybe as one-offs, I'd take the lefties, right? I'd take a Julian and Alex Kirilloff, Max Kepler. I want to see what that lineup looks like. So maybe it's a mini stack, but I don't want to 5-man these guys because I think a lot of the field is going to do that. And if a lot of the field is doing that, I don't want to be in line with everything that everyone's doing. And I think it's worth taking a chance on that. So I'll take some one-offs here and there. And I'm not going to play Joe Ross, but I am kind of betting on him at least, finding a way to get through this lineup a little bit. Now, if it becomes a 3-game slate, that might be a little bit harder to do, but I like that Marlins offense a lot more than I like the Twins. And I like this Brewers offense. I mean, I don't know how Chris Paddock, you said we don't have a lot of information on him and how he's looked and everything, but Chris Paddock, he was a disaster. He had control issues. When a guy's control issues, you talked about this a little bit on a show with Stats recently, it's not always about attacking the guy that's going to get home runs, right? It's attacking the guy that's just going to be wild and out of control. And then the bullpen comes in and it's an absolute shit show. I think this could be a good situation for the Brewers. The Brewers are playing really well too. They obviously have guys too, like William Contreras at catcher, who catcher's always a tough roster, right? You can throw him in there. They have cheap value throughout their lineup that you could bet on. You got Bryce Terang at the bottom, who I definitely don't mind. Gary Sanchez, we know we like him for his power and pop at 3.3K if you want a cheap catcher option. I just think this Brewers offense, for me, they're one of my favorite offenses right now on the slate. So Brewers and Marlins are two of my favorites. I want to be over on the Brewers and more under on the Twins. Not that I'm not going to play Twins. I'm going to stick strictly to the lefties, I think, from there, and then kind of move on to these other games. I mean, there's one more left, really, that we have to talk about. It's that Braves game, but that's one that we got to talk about that weather because that's going to be a big thing. And if the Braves are on this slate and we're able to play them, that's going to be a big shift on how to handle your offenses and your stacks.
Yeah, no question. I do like the lefties on both sides. Buffy mentions Bryce Terang, who's running wild right now. He's got 6 stolen bases already in half playing time or something. I did look it up. Pretty hard to run on Chris Paddock, at least it has been historically. Now we haven't seen him pitch under the new stolen bases rules with the pickoffs and all the pitch clock and all that stuff. So yeah, Terang maybe still runs. At least historically, though, Paddock has done a very good job limiting the running game. I did want to mention that. And then I do really like the lefties here in the Twins lineup. I don't think we have the Twins lineup yet, but assuming Julian, Kirilloff, Max Kepler, Wallner, all these guys are in the lineup. Twins kind of banged up right now with injuries too, so they do have a better chance of staying in there and avoiding the dreaded pinch hit risk. I do like those Twins lefties quite a bit, but I will say rough start for this Twins offense, carrying off where they left off last year, letting us down a little bit. But nevertheless, I do think some of these Twins lefties are cheap enough to fit in there if you are spending at pitching. That is Minnesota and Milwaukee, certainly an interesting game there. Let's go to the next one on the slate, the lone game in the 2:10 Eastern time window. It is the Atlanta Braves, Chicago White Sox. Braves listed as massive favorites here. I'm seeing them around -330 to -340, depending on where you look. Of course, makes sense. One of the best offenses in baseball, and their ace on the hill, probably the best pitcher in baseball, in Spencer Strider. They'll go up against a pretty sad White Sox team without Eloy Jimenez. And then Dominique Leone will be on the mound, it looks like, for the Chicago White Sox. I think that's true. Is that who you have listed?
I have, who is it? I saw Nick Nastrini was one guy. I mean,
I've seen a bunch of guys listed for the White Sox. So
it's a mess. I'll say that, right? Like it might not be great hitting weather, but it's going to be a disaster.
It's changed several times. The point is, the White Sox will be rolling out some trash pitchers. Man, we saw Garrett Crochet yesterday. I wish I would have played him even against the Braves. He is as legit as they come. Was understandably gun shy, right? The Braves have the highest team total, best offense in baseball, I think. So, but I still wish I would have pulled the trigger. But anyway, that's not the case today. They do not have Mr. Crochet on the mound. It is going to be, it looks like kind of a hodgepodge of pretty bad pitchers pitching for the White Sox, which, puts the Braves in play. It looks like the market pretty high on the Braves. Once again, they do have the highest team total on this slate. Yeah, they do. Overall, over 5 runs projected. Now, like I said, weather in Chicago looks brutal right now. I mean, it has been for the last couple of days. It's been, if you look at the guys, they're all maxed up. They got the ski masks up to their eyeballs. Ronald Acuna looks absolutely miserable out there. And like I said, it is kind of a wintry mix, I suppose you could call it, in Chicago right now. Now, they kind of played through a similar thing each of the last 2 days. Obviously, this is an interleague matchup, so they don't have any more games between the two teams coming up, which often makes it a priority to get this game in. It does look like it's kind of slightly warming up a little bit throughout the day, as you'd expect. So I don't know if they're going to play this game. Obviously, the closer it gets to game time and they haven't called it yet, the more likely it plays. And also, like I said, I do think if they do decide to start this game, which obviously gets more and more likely the closer we get, I do think it will play without issue from that point, just because I think the weather is only going to improve, not get worse. So, yeah, I guess at this point we'll go under the assumption that it will play. I still worry about just the ability to hit in this weather. It's just so cold. And then, I know how good Spencer Strider is, and I know the matchup is good, but there is a potential, man, going where he's probably never pitched in this type of just straight up winter conditions. Where it's just freezing, the wind's blowing, it's cold. You could easily just kind of lose your stuff out there, right? Not be able to grip the ball, not be able to spin it the way you want to. So I still do think Strider is obviously an awesome play against this lineup. And obviously it's a good part to pitch in if he's his normal self, but you could easily see his just velocity not be there, his command of his pitches be down. So he does make me a little bit nervous, even with, the massive favorite. I get why his props all look good, all that stuff. But at that price point, 11.3K, he does make me at least a little bit nervous just because of the conditions, which, of course, generally favor pitchers. But I think it could be a case where he just can't get warmed up and can't kind of be his normal self. And maybe he doesn't go super deep into this game. I don't know. It's an odd situation. We don't see teams playing in this type of weather very often. I'll throw it over to you, though, Atlanta and the Chicago White Sox.
Yeah, I agree with the take of weird things could happen because it's a different situation, right? I think to just assume that these guys are robots and they're pitching in a normal environment is it's a dumb thought process, right? Now, the key with the Braves is, if the Braves are going to have high ownership, which there's definitely a chance they do, you can make a case of them being very good fades.
I think they're gonna be super highly owned if the game looks okay to play. I mean, they got the highest total on the slate, and the pitching's not that expensive for the most part.
Yeah, and when I when I ran stuff, which I just did like kind of a pretty raw run, I got a lot of Braves as like one-offs and stuff. And like, I just think they're going to like fill throughout people's lineups as easy one-off options to get in there. Like, so I'm a little cautious with these Braves on this slate. And again, I like to, shy away from the weather at times and let other people take chance on it. Like, how great of a game is this to really take the chance on? I just don't know. If there's a window for Strider, which is what I'm going to look for, I'm going to look for when the game starts. Is there like a 2-hour window for Strider to just mow through these guys? Because listen, I don't need 3 hours, right? I need like an hour and a half and 2 hours.
Honestly, if the game starts, I think they're going to be fine. I wouldn't worry about the weather. I wouldn't worry about them postponing or delaying the game if they do decide to start it. The weather is only going to improve there.
Yeah. So now one of the big issues you have to think about too is this game is an hour after all the other games start. So you have to kind of make this decision in the next hour and 20 minutes or so, right? Like you can't wait and then be like, oh, I can pivot to.
Well, and then also we do have one more game to talk about, Cincy and Philadelphia. That game has weather issues too, and it's 2 hours after this one.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, you could potentially have a full lineup of just straight zeros if you play the last 2 games. Like, it's a very, very odd slate, no question about it.
Yeah, and there was just a tornado there, right? Like, I don't know. They might be thinking about like fans and stuff like that. Or actually, that one's in Philly. Sorry, not Cincy. But so there wasn't the tornado issue. But I know weather is a disaster there. I know I talked to my family and they said the weather is just an absolute disaster over there right now. So, yeah. I mean, I would be cautious of that Cincinnati-Philly game as well. But the issue is you're going to get a lot of Strider right now. So you have to make that decision. Like I said, I hope we can get enough news where I can take the chance on Strider. I like Strider. It's clearly a good spot against the Chicago team. I want to be higher on Strider and lower on these offenses, lower on the White Sox, lower on the Braves. I want to look at more of these dome games and then kind of move on. That's just how I see it. And like we said earlier in the show, DC, if people missed that, like if you like the Braves today, don't play Ozzie Albies as a one-off and that's it. Play the 5-man because if you get a 0 because the game doesn't play or like the weather's just so bad, that's not worth it, right? Take a one-off in another game that seems a little bit better. I agree with that theory. Either load up on the game or you don't.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And also, we just don't know like how the game is going to play itself in terms, wind can switch on weather days like this. And I think stacking up the Braves or fading them entirely does make a bunch of sense to me. Same thing can apply to our last game on the slate, which does start 2 hours after Atlanta and Chicago. I believe the Cincinnati-Philly game, which we'll talk about next, last game on the slate, I think they moved it up to start here at 4:05 Eastern time. I think it had a later start originally to try to have a better chance of getting the game in. It is currently raining in Philadelphia right now. It looks like the rain will stop for at least a bit, maybe giving them a window to play, and then the rain will pick up later. I don't think you're going to have a clear answer on whether or not this game is going to play by the time Watt comes around. And then obviously there's no games after this one, so there's nowhere to pivot to if you are in this game and it gets postponed or gets delayed, whatever. So, Zach Wheeler scheduled to pitch for Philadelphia. Frankie Montas. The other thing I would add, Mangone, Philadelphia canceled their opening day game when like a day beforehand when they could have ended up playing. The weather actually didn't turn out to be that bad. So they have a history, right, of being cautious, and they're not going to want to waste their ace, Zach Wheeler, if they – I don't even know. I think the home team gets to make the call. I'm not 100% sure on that. I think they have some influence there. But regardless, I'm worried about this game. I do think Zach Wheeler at 8,800 is arguably the best point per dollar pitcher on this entire slate. If this game does play, the Reds obviously have some real power in that lineup, but there's also a lot of strikeouts to be had. And if this game plays, it is going to be pretty good or pretty tough hitting conditions, I would say, because I have a hard time saying any like miserable weather game is like perfect pitching conditions, but pretty tough hitting conditions, I would say. So yeah, Zach Wheeler. I mean, if you want to take the chance on him, think I would play him with some Philly bats as well against Frankie Montas, right? Get in on the Phillies here and hope for the best. That's really what you're going to have to do is just pray it goes. I don't think I really want to play Zach Wheeler by himself. We've mentioned this several times throughout the show. I do think it's an important point on this particular slate. Maybe you play him with Bryce Harper, who hit 3 home runs yesterday, or Kyle Schwarber, or a Bryson Stott. Brandon Marsh has been swinging a good bat. They've put up some runs despite playing in bad hitting conditions so far. So, yeah, I think I'm not really on the red side either way. I'm not playing Montas. I'm not risking it with Montas or with Reds hitters, frankly. It just doesn't make sense going up against an elite pitcher in a weather question mark game. But the Philly side is interesting. I think if you're playing it, you get several Phillies in there, and you hope that it turns out and they can play the game. But I don't think we're going to have an answer to that, as I stated, and you're just going to have to risk it if that's something you're willing to do. Over to you, Mangone, Philly, and Cincinnati.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what you said. Like Zach Wheeler, he's a great pitcher, and if you play him, like, I don't need to play a 5-man Phillies. It could just be like, a couple, which I think is perfect.
There's at least a couple more guys in there though with you. You might as well.
Yeah, I don't want to play Wheeler just like by himself, because like if you get a 0 from your pitcher, like you're just hoping to min cash only, right? Like yeah. I'd get some other bats in there, hoping the game goes. Again, don't need the 5-man. You could, but I don't need it. And especially against someone like Montas. We know Montas, he can get wild at times. He's like very hot. He's got a high ceiling but low floor, right? We just know how Montas can be. So that's how I would handle it. I don't want to attack Zach Wheeler at all with the Reds. We've played the Reds at times. I know Philadelphia's not the worst hitting park, but if I'm playing the Reds, it's typically at home, right? And this isn't a great spot to play this Reds offense, so I'm not going to get exposure to them. It's really just looking at Zach Wheeler and looking at the power bats that we talked about on the Philly side of the ball. And obviously play the guys that you think are going to play. Like some of the guys at the bottom lineup, you never know, they could sit. So just be ready to make pivots if you have to as well. That's another thing to think about for sure, because you might not have the lineup in time, right? Like games are going to lock here in an hour, and that one's like 3 hours after. So that's something else to think about when kind of constructing your teams.
For sure. That is all 6 games on the slate. It really is a bizarre slate, maybe the most bizarre slate we're going to see all season with all the weather issues. Of course, we'll be in the Discord answering questions for members. If you do want to join us at Run for Your Sports, you can use promo code DC15 for 15% off a weekly, monthly, full package. We do have MLB only if you're interested in that. But of course, what you should really do is join us for the full Run for Your Sports package. We've got, of course, the Masters coming up for golf, the end of college baseball season, or college basketball season, not college baseball, and the NBA playoffs right around the corner, MMA, all the other good stuff, tennis, NASCAR, whatever you need. We've got it for you over on the Run for Your Sports team. We'll go briefly, Mangone, to the late slate. We'll just spend a few minutes there, talk about some guys that interest us. First, though, let's do plays of the day on the early slate. Obviously, difficult to say with all the question marks, but as it stands now, do you have a play of the day for us, Mangone?
Yeah, I want to take a Marlin. Let's go a lower guy in the order. Let's go with Avisail Garcia, a value guy that you can get in there. I love the Marlins, though. I think they're a good option. But if you're looking for a guy from the 6 through 9 to help, give you a contrarian look rather than the 1 through 5, Avisail Garcia will be my guy.
All right, we got Avisail Garcia for Mangone. I'll go to the Twins, cheap first baseman or outfield. You can play him at either spot. Alex Kirilloff hasn't done much yet. I think he'll be hitting in the 2-hole. And Joe Ross, historically, against left-handed bats, has not performed well whatsoever. That's a wrap on the early slate. Still a lot of question marks. We'll try to get to the bottom of it in the Discord, all that good stuff. Let's go to the late slate. 5-gamer here. I will have my article that I do Monday through Friday. It will be on the late slate game. So I'll have that up for members a few hours before that game, that slate starts. Now, there is weather issues in this game, too. 3 of the 5 games, Nationals in D.C., New York Mets, Chicago Cubs all have weather question marks. So it's just one of those days in the MLB streets. Pitching-wise, looks to me like the two top options are the 2 highest priced guys. Tyler Glasnow hosting the Giants 9,800. He's been not that great so far. He was good against St. Louis, okay against San Diego. I still think he's got some big starts coming. I bet he has his first big start of the year against the Giants. And then I like Christian Javier. Man, this Toronto team has been – I know they hit the 2-run home run to win the game against Hader yesterday, but they've been pretty abysmal for the most part. Christian Javier looked good in that first start. I think he might be having a bounce-back season here. So I think I'd, for the most part, be spending on pitching on the late slate. Any takes on pitching, hitting, or otherwise before we get on out of here?
Yeah, it's definitely not the easiest slate because, like, obviously with like all the bad pitchers and are like in the weather games, it looks like a little bit. So that's one of the things to see. And of course, like even that Cubs game, like the wind is going to be blowing in. It's going to be like 40 miles. It's going to be 40 degrees. Like I want to attack Kyle Quantrill, but like, I don't know, man, like the weather's going to be so bad. It's definitely tough. If
it was even reasonable weather, hitting weather in Chicago, I'd be all over the Cubs. But
yeah,
like I'm seeing like Ballpark Pal, which does like park projections. They have home runs down like 46% in the Cubs games. Like I don't know.
Yeah, it just seems a little risky for sure. I don't think Steve Boynton's fan that he brings to the game could help us out. So to blow the balls out of the park. But I think the Astros are probably my favorite team on the slate. The reason why I would say the Astros are my favorite is because, I mean, it's just buying on an elite offense that's hitting the ball well, and they have been hitting the ball a lot better. Chris Bassett, he's not really a swing and miss guy, right? He can get strikeouts at times, but he's more of a guy that pitches the contact, and you don't want to pitch the contact to Kyle Tucker and Yordan Alvarez, right? It just doesn't work out well. So if I had to pick an offense to bet on, it'd probably be the Astros. I think a lot of people will be betting on the Dodgers or the Astros. My bet would be the Astros. And then pitching-wise, obviously, I'd like a lot of these good pitchers. Javier, I know the Jays have been ice cold, so I wouldn't mind that. Glass now, we know he's just, absolutely consistent. So he's someone that I would definitely look to go to. If you think for some reason Glasnow's going to have one of those games where the control's not there, you could take a chance on the Giants, but I think that's unnecessary unless Glasnow's going to be like 80% owned or something egregious, right? Where you can make a case for the leverage call there. But it's hard to make decisions on that late slate because we don't have any of this news, right? Like, is the Nationals game going to play? Is the Mets game going to play? That's going to be key. And I think if some of those other games do play, there's a better chance that these games play, right? Because that means overall the weather probably has lightened up all around. That's another thing to kind of bring up.
For sure. We'll call it a show after that. Get out of here a little bit early. We do have another earlier slate tomorrow. I think we will be on air at a similar time, maybe a little bit later tomorrow morning, but we'll have, I think we'll have a show regardless. I know only a few games on Thursday, but we'll try to bring you guys the content regardless. Obviously, if you remember, get in the Discord, lots to talk about before these games lock. And looking forward to some warmer weather and some more straightforward slates in the future, but is what it is today. We do appreciate you guys watching. Anyway, hit the like button if you haven't done so on your way out. For Mangone, I'm DC. We'll check you next time.